If there is one truth I have learned through the quiet heartbreaks and sudden turns of my life, it is this. Never lower your head just because someone else forgets your worth. When people try to push you into the shadows to make room for their own spotlight, do not fight for a seat at a table where you are not valued. Walk away with your dignity intact. Because sometimes the table you are forced to walk toward holds a seat meant specifically for your destiny. Humiliation is often just life's painful, disguised way of repositioning you for something far greater than you ever had the courage to ask for. My name is Marcus. For 8 years, I was married to a woman named Clara. When Clara and I first got married, we had nothing but a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a noisy bakery in downtown Chicago, 2 rusty bicycles, and a shared dream. I was a structural engineer working long, brutal hours for a mid-sized firm, while Clara was trying to break into the ultra-competitive world of luxury interior design. In those early days, we were a team. I spent my weekends building sample display boards for her clients, drafting render sketches when she was too exhausted to hit her deadlines, and quietly postponing my own career ambitions so we could pour every extra dollar into launching her design firm, Vanguard Spaces. I loved her with a quiet, unconditional devotion. When her firm lost money in its first 2 years, I took on night shifts performing safety audits on freight bridges to cover her payroll. I never complained. I believed in her. I thought that when you love someone, their success is your success and their burden is your burden. By our 7th year of marriage, Clara's firm finally hit the big time. She landed contracts with high-end boutique hotels, wealthy real estate developers, and local elites. But as the money started flowing in, the woman I married began to fade away. Replaced by someone I barely recognized, Clara became obsessed with status. She traded her warm laugh for a practiced, sharp smile. She replaced our cozy living room furniture with uncomfortable, minimalist art pieces that looked good in magazines, but felt cold to live with. Slowly, subtly, I started becoming an embarrassment to her. I was not a man of high society. I preferred flannel shirts, practical boots, and quiet evenings with a good book over $500 a plate networking dinners. When Clara spoke to her new circle of wealthy friends, architects, and private equity investors, she would leave me out of the conversation entirely. If someone asked what I did, she would wave her hand dismissively and say, "Oh, Marcus does back-end technical compliance," as if my work keeping bridges and building structural intact was a minor, unglamorous chore compared to her paint swatches and imported marble. I tried to talk to her about it. I told her I missed the simple nights we used to share, eating takeout on the floor of our old apartment. But Clara would just roll her eyes, touch up her lipstick, and reply, "Marcus, we aren't kids anymore. Success requires optics. If you don't care about how you look to the world, that's your problem. But don't drag my reputation down with you." The breaking point arrived on a rainy Friday evening in October. It was the night of the annual Midwest Architecture and Real Estate Gala, the biggest, most exclusive social event of the year in our city. Clara's firm had been nominated for Design Firm of the Year, and she had spent 3 months preparing for it. She had bought a custom $3,000 black silk evening gown, hired a professional makeup artist, and spent weeks obsessing over who would be attending. I didn't want to go. High society galas were exhausting to me, but I knew how much this night meant to her. I bought a classic tailored tuxedo, got a fresh haircut, and stood by her side as her dutiful husband. When we arrived at the Grand Imperial Ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and heavy ambition. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceilings, reflecting light off silver ice buckets and polished marble floors. Hundreds of the city's most influential figures walked the floor, laughing loudly and exchanging business cards. Clara moved through the crowd like a hawk searching for prey, her eyes darting past middle-tier professionals, scanning for the heavy hitters. I walked beside her, holding her clutch when she needed to adjust her dress, offering polite smiles to people who barely looked me in the eye. Around 8 in the evening, the chime sounded, signaling for everyone to take their assigned seats for dinner and the awards ceremony. Clara grabbed my arm and pulled me toward table 1. The premier table positioned directly in front of the main stage. This was the head table, reserved for the sponsors, key speaker nominees, and major developers. As we approached, I saw the place cards on the silk tablecloth. Clara's name was prominently displayed next to a tall, handsome man in a midnight blue velvet tuxedo. His name was Julian Croft. Julian Croft was the managing director of Croft Capital, a massive commercial real estate firm that had recently acquired half the downtown financial district. He was rich, notoriously arrogant, exceptionally handsome, and single. Over the past 6 months, Clara had mentioned Julian's name with increasing frequency. She claimed they were just discussing a potential $10 million resort contract. But I had noticed the late-night text messages, the sudden change in her screen lock password, and the way her face lit up whenever his name appeared on her phone. Next to Clara's place card was my card. Marcus Vance. Clara stopped 2 steps short of the table. She looked at my place card, then looked at Julian Croft, who was standing nearby, sipping champagne and surrounded by an entourage of admiring associate developers. Julian looked over at Clara, flashed a charm-offensive smile, and winked at her. Then his eyes flicked to me, taking in my plain, traditional black tuxedo and my quiet demeanor, and a faint smirk crossed his lips. Clara's face tightened. She turned to me, her hand gripping my wrist with a force that was almost desperate. Her eyes were hard, lacking even a single spark of warmth or gratitude for the 8 years we had built together. She leaned in, so close I could smell the sharp tang of her expensive wine. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice low, venomous, and laced with absolute coldness. "Julian's primary investor just showed up unexpectedly. He needs an extra seat at this table if we're going to close the resort deal tonight. You don't belong at table 1 anyway. You'll just sit there looking out of place and ruin the energy." I stared at her, feeling a cold, hollow ache open up in my chest. "Clara, this is our table. My name is on the card." Without a second thought, Clara reached down, picked up my place card, slid it into her purse, and squeezed another chair into the gap for Julian's investor. She turned back to me, her expression completely devoid of remorse. "Find someone else to sit with," she whispered coldly. "Don't cause a scene, Marcus. Go sit near the back, we'll talk at home." She turned her back on me before I could even reply, sliding smoothly into her chair next to Julian Croft. Julian immediately leaned over, whispering something in her ear that made her throw her head back in a melodic, practiced laugh, a laugh I hadn't heard her use with me in years. I stood there alone in the middle of the crowded, roaring ballroom, surrounded by music, laughter, and light, feeling more invisible than I ever had in my entire life. Every instinct inside me screamed to demand an explanation, to flip the table, to shout at her for humiliating me in front of hundreds of people after everything I had sacrificed for her success. My face burned with shame. A few people at neighboring tables had witnessed the interaction and were whispering behind their hands, throwing pitying glances in my direction. I closed my eyes, took a deep, slow breath, and forced my heart rate down. No, I told myself. I will not give her the satisfaction of a scene. I will not degrade myself by begging for a place at a table where I am discarded like trash. I turned around and quietly walked away from table 1. I walked past the middle rows of tables, tables 4, 5, 6, where rising executives and wealthy socialites sat, drinking fine wine and talking loudly about their yachts and summer homes. Every seat was full, every circle closed. I kept walking, moving further toward the rear of the massive ballroom where the light was dimmer and the noise of the party faded into a low hum. Way back in the far corner, tucked beside a large decorative palm tree, and near the service doors where the catering staff walked in and out, sat table 18. It was a round table meant for 8 people, but it was almost completely empty. Sitting there, entirely alone, was an elderly man. He looked to be in his late 70s or early 80s. He wore an old-fashioned, simple charcoal suit that was neat, but clearly decades out of style. His white hair was neatly combed back, and he was sitting quietly, holding a glass of plain tap water, staring calmly out at the glitzy crowd in the center of the room. Nobody was talking to him. Nobody was paying attention to him. To the sparkling high society elites in the front row, he was practically part of the scenery, an forgotten old man left in the dark corner. I walked up to table 18. The old man looked up as I approached. His eyes were a striking, piercing blue, remarkably sharp and alert for a man of his age. "Is this seat taken?" I asked softly, pointing to a chair beside him. The old man looked slightly surprised, then a gentle, genuine smile broke across his weathered face. "Every seat at this table is open, son. It seems table 18 isn't high-demand real estate tonight. Please, sit." I pulled out the chair and sat down. "I'm Marcus. I said, extending my hand across the tablecloth. He took my hand and gave it a surprisingly firm, solid handshake. "Arthur," he replied. "Just Arthur." "Nice to meet you, Arthur," I said, leaning back in my chair and adjusting my collar. Arthur looked at me thoughtfully, glancing over his glass of water toward the front of the room where table 1 was located. He had clearly noticed me walking all the way from the front row with a stiff jaw and an empty place card slot in my mind. "You look like a man who just received a sudden, unexpected change in coordinates," Arthur said softly, his tone devoid of judgment, carrying only quiet wisdom. I let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "That's an accurate way to put it, Arthur. I was just informed that my presence at the head table was bad for the energy of the room." Arthur glanced toward table 1, where Clara was currently clinking her champagne glass with Julian Croft, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Arthur's eyes lingered on Julian for a fraction of a second, a strange, unreadable shadow passing over his features, before he turned back to me. "People often mistake the loudest, brightest table for the most important one," Arthur said smoothly, taking a small sip of his water. "They spend their whole lives breaking their backs to get a seat at the top, only to realize the company is hollow and the food tastes like ashes. Tell me, Marcus, what do you do when you aren't being exiled to table 18? I smiled. There was something remarkably grounding about Arthur. He didn't ask me how much money I made, what car I drove, or who I knew. He just asked who I was. "I'm a structural integrity engineer," I said. "I work with old infrastructure, bridges, foundation framing, load-bearing retrofits. I make sure that the things people build actually hold up when the storm comes." Arthur's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "A foundational man," he remarked, nodding slowly. "In a world obsessed with paint and glass facades, very few people care about the foundation anymore. Everyone wants to design the penthouse, but nobody wants to make sure the soil beneath the basement can bear the weight." For the next hour, while the rest of the room engaged in shallow networking and loud boasting, Arthur and I had the most captivating conversation I had enjoyed in years. I told him about my love for structural mechanics, how a properly designed steel truss could distribute thousands of tons of stress quietly, invisibly, without ever asking for applause. I spoke about the beauty of honest craftsmanship, about how a flaw in a foundation, no matter how deeply buried or painted over, would eventually force the entire structure to crumble if left unaddressed. Arthur listened intently, nodding along, occasionally asking deep, highly technical questions that surprised me. He understood engineering concepts, financial risk management, and systemic stress better than most industry veterans I knew. "You love what you do," Arthur observed quietly as the catering staff served our meal. Simple roast chicken, while table 1 was served filet mignon, I admitted, looking down at my plate. "Lately, I've been feeling like my work doesn't matter much. The world seems to belong to people like Julian Croft. People who buy, sell, and flip things for quick profits without ever building anything real." Arthur smiled softly, a strange, knowing glint in his eye. "Do not be deceived by quick flyers, Marcus. Thunder makes a lot of noise, but it's the quiet rain that makes the crops grow. A man who builds on hype builds on sand. When the tide comes in, the sand washes away. Remember that." At 9:30, the main event began. The house lights dimmed and spotlights illuminated the grand stage. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone to announce the major awards of the night. Clara's firm, Vanguard Spaces, won the award for Commercial Design Firm of the Year. The ballroom erupted in applause. Clara stood up in her stunning black gown, glowing with vanity, and walked up to the stage. Julian Croft stood up beside her, escorting her to the steps and blowing her a kiss in front of the entire audience. On stage, Clara accepted the crystal trophy. She took the microphone and began her speech. She thanked her lead designers, her marketing team, her high-end clients, and specifically gave a glowing 5-minute tribute to Julian Croft and Croft Capital for believing in the vision of modern luxury. She did not mention my name once. Not a word about the man who worked night shifts to pay her first employees. Not a word about the husband who drafted her early models while she slept from exhaustion. I was completely erased from her success story. Beside me, Arthur looked at me gently. "That hurts," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement of my pain. "It used to," I said softly, feeling a sudden, strange sense of clarity wash over me. But watching her up there right now, I realize something, Arthur. I didn't lose her tonight. I lost her a long time ago. Tonight is just the day I finally accepted it. Arthur nodded approvingly. Acceptance is a powerful foundation, Marcus. It's the point from which real structures are built. After Clara's speech, the master of ceremonies returned to the podium, his voice taking on a far more serious, respectful tone. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the host announced, we come to the most prestigious moment of the evening. Tonight, we present the Lifetime Achievement Award in Urban Infrastructure and Development. This award comes with a $50 million municipal redevelopment contract for our city's historic harbor district. The room went completely silent. The Harbor District project was the single largest urban contract in the state, a multi-generational deal that every major developer and investment firm had been desperately fighting over for 3 years. Julian Croft adjusted his velvet tuxedo, sitting up straight at table 1. He smirked at Clara, whispering something confident. It was common knowledge in the room that Croft Capital had been aggressively lobbying for this contract, and Julian was fully expecting to sweep the floor with it. This year, the host continued, the board has decided to honor a man whose legendary career built the very skyline we see outside these windows today. A man who started as a humble bridge welder 60 years ago and built the largest, most respected infrastructure conglomerate in the country, Sterling Global Infrastructure. A quiet rustle went through the crowd. People looked around, whispering. Sterling Global was an industrial titan. They owned steel mills, civil engineering firms, maritime ports, and institutional real estate across 3 continents. But the founder, Arthur Sterling, was notoriously reclusive. He almost never appeared in public, rarely gave interviews, and ran his multi-billion-dollar empire with quiet, uncompromising authority. Ladies and gentlemen, the host said, his voice trembling with genuine excitement, please join me in welcoming the founder, chairman, and principal owner of Sterling Global, Mr. Arthur Sterling. The audience began to applaud politely, but people were confused, looking toward the VIP tables near the stage, expecting a high-profile billionaire surrounded by bodyguards to stand up from table 1 or table 2. Nobody moved at the front. Beside me, at humble, forgotten table 18 in the dark back corner of the room, the elderly man in the out-of-style charcoal suit slowly wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. Arthur turned to me, a faint, mischievous twinkle in his sharp blue eyes. Excuse me for a moment, Marcus, Arthur said calmly. I need to go accept a plaque. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. Arthur. Sterling. Arthur smiled, patted my shoulder gently, and stood up. The room was still looking toward the front when the spotlight operator, following a signal from the stage manager, swung the massive, bright beam of white light away from the head tables. The spotlight swept across the floor, passing over table 1, passing over table 5, moving all the way to the dark, forgotten rear corner of the ballroom. The beam focused squarely on table 18. It illuminated old Arthur Sterling standing there in his simple suit, calm, relaxed, and completely unbothered by the dramatic shift in attention. A collective gasp echoed across the grand imperial ballroom. Hundreds of heads turned simultaneously toward the back corner. At table 1, Clara's jaw dropped. She turned in her chair, her eyes wide with total shock, staring at the old man standing in the dark corner. The man she had completely ignored, sitting at the table where she had banished her husband. Julian Croft's face turned instantly pale. The arrogant smirk vanished from his lips, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Julian had been trying to get a meeting with Arthur Sterling for 2 years to pitch his company for investment, but Sterling Global had repeatedly ignored his calls. Arthur walked slowly, deliberately toward the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, people bowing their heads, whispering furiously, terrified that they had ignored the most powerful man in the room all evening. Arthur stepped up the stairs of the stage and took the microphone from the host. He held the heavy crystal trophy in one hand, looking out over the sea of dressed-up elites. Thank you, Arthur began, his voice deep, gravelly, and carrying an effortless power that commanded total silence in the room. 60 years ago, I started my company with a welding torch, a pair of work boots, and a simple rule my father gave me. Never judge a building by its glass facade, and never judge a man by where he sits. The uncomfortable ripple passed through the audience. Arthur's eyes scanned the room, resting briefly on table 1, looking directly at Julian, Croft, and Clara, before moving back toward the rear corner where I was sitting alone at table 18. "Night," Arthur continued into the microphone. "I came to this gala incognito. I didn't want a grand entrance. I didn't want people kissing my ring or telling me lies to get my money. I wanted to see who this city's business leaders really are when they think nobody important is watching." You could hear a pin drop in the ballroom. Julian Croft looked like he was about to throw up. Clara sat frozen, her hand hovering awkwardly near her pearl necklace. "I sat at table 18 tonight," Arthur said, his voice reverberating off the marble walls. "In the dark, near the kitchen doors. And for 2 hours, almost every person in this room walked past me like I was invisible. They looked at my old suit, they looked at my empty table, and they decided I was worth nothing to them." Arthur paused, letting the silence heavy with guilt hang over the room. "Except for one man," Arthur said softly, a smile entering his voice. "One young man walked away from the grand head table, after being told he didn't belong there, and came to sit beside an old man in the corner. He didn't know who I was, he didn't ask for my business card, he didn't pitch me a deal. He simply sat down, treated me with genuine respect, and talked to me about honor, structural integrity, and building things that last." Arthur pointed his long, thin finger directly toward table 18. "That young man is Marcus Vance," Arthur announced clearly. The entire ballroom turned around once again, every eye in the house pinning me in place. I felt my chest tighten, my heart pounding in my ears. At table 1, Clara looked as if she had been hit by a freight train. Her eyes darted from Arthur to me and then back to Arthur. The realization of what she had done, how she had thrown away her husband, who was now being publicly honored by the most powerful titan in the industry, hit her with brutal force. "As chairman of Sterling Global," Arthur continued smoothly, "I hold the final exclusive decision on who will direct our $50 million harbor infrastructure redevelopment project. For months, large firms like Croft Capital have been begging for this contract." Julian Croft sat up. A tiny, desperate glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes. "However," Arthur said coldly, looking down at Julian, "a firm that operates on hollow optics, arrogance, and disrespect for basic human decency has no structural integrity. Croft Capital is officially disqualified from bidding on any Sterling Global contract. Effective immediately." Julian's face went completely ghost white. He slumped back in his chair, knowing his financial firm's stock was about to take a catastrophic hit. "Instead," Arthur announced, his voice soaring with authority, "Sterling Global will be establishing a brand new primary civil design division, and I am publicly offering the position of Chief Structural Director and lead partner of the Harbor Redevelopment Project to Mr. Marcus Vance." The room burst into thunderous, deafening applause. People at the neighboring tables stood up, clapping frantically, eager to be seen supporting the man Arthur Sterling had just crowned. I sat there at table 18, completely stunned. Arthur looked across the room at me, gave a simple, knowing nod, and raised his glass of water in my direction. When the official program concluded 30 minutes later, the ballroom dissolved into chaotic networking. But the dynamic had completely inverted. Table 1 was entirely deserted. People walked right past Julian, Croft, and Clara as if they were toxic. Julian was frantically on his phone, arguing with his board of directors, while Clara stood beside him, looking completely lost, holding her trophy that suddenly felt entirely worthless. Meanwhile, a massive line of developers, investors, and high society figures had formed near table 18, all desperately waiting to introduce themselves to me and shake my hand. I politely excused myself from the crowd, stepped around the line, and walked toward the quiet terrace outside to catch my breath in the cool night air. I was standing by the stone balustrade, looking out over the city lights, when I heard the sharp, rushed click of high heels behind me. I turned around. It was Clara. She was flushed, her silk dress slightly disheveled, her eyes wide with a frantic mixture of desperation, pride, and greed. "Marcus!" she gasped, stepping toward me, reaching out her hands to take mine. "Marcus, oh my God, I can't believe it. $50 million? Chief Structural Director? Marcus, this is incredible. We did it!" I didn't take her hands. I stepped back, keeping my hands resting calmly in my tuxedo pockets. "We didn't do anything, Clara," I said quietly. Clara's fake excitement faltered for a second, replaced by an anxious, trembling smile. Marcus, come on. I know you're upset about earlier, but you have to understand I was just stressed about the business deal with Julian. I didn't mean anything by it. It was just business optics. Business optics, I repeated, letting the words sink in. You traded 8 years of marriage, 8 years of my loyalty and support, for a seat beside a man who thought he could use you to get a contract. You looked at me and told me I ruined the energy of your table. I was wrong, Clara cried out, a tear finally breaking through her heavy eye makeup running down her cheek. I was foolish, Marcus. Please, we're a team. We've been together since that tiny apartment above the bakery. Think about everything we built. We didn't build a team, Clara, I said, my voice steady, calm, and entirely free of anger. I built a foundation. You built a decorative wall. And just like I told Arthur tonight, when a structure has no integrity, it eventually collapses. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the simple gold wedding band I had worn for 8 years, and held it out to her. Clara stared at the ring, her breath hitching in her throat. Marcus, please. Don't do this. You told me to find someone else to sit with, Clara, I whispered gently. And I did. I found myself. And I found people who respect me. I placed the gold ring gently into the palm of her hand, turned my back on her and walked away into the night, leaving her standing alone on the cold, empty balcony. Update. It has been 2 years since that fateful night at the Grand Imperial Ballroom, and my life has transformed in ways I could have never imagined. The day after the gala, I filed for divorce. Clara tried to fight it at first, hire expensive lawyers and claim a piece of my new venture with Sterling Global, but the pre-existing agreements regarding her own firm, which I had helped legally establish years ago, and the paper trail of my financial contributions meant she walked away with only what she had brought in, her design firm. Without the backing of Sterling Global or Croft Capital, Vanguard Spaces rapidly lost its prestige. High-end clients, hearing rumors of the public disaster at the gala and Julian Croft's downfall, pulled their funding. Julian Croft's firm suffered massive investor withdrawals after losing the harbor contract. He was removed from his position as managing director 6 months later and relocated out of state. Last I heard, Clara was forced to sell her luxury studio and downsize significantly, struggling to keep small residential renovation contracts afloat. As for me, taking the position as chief structural director at Sterling Global was the greatest professional decision of my life. Over the past 24 months, my team and I successfully completed Phase 1 of the Chicago Harbor redevelopment, building sustainable, heavy-duty civic infrastructure, public parks, and storm-resilient pier foundations that will serve the city for the next 100 years. The project came in under budget and won international civil engineering honors. Arthur Sterling became far more than a business partner to me. He became a mentor, a surrogate father, and a dear friend. We still meet every single Thursday evening for dinner. We don't go to high society steakhouses or 5-star galas. We sit at a quiet, unpretentious diner on the south side of town, order plain black coffee and pot roast, and talk about engineering, life, and the future. 6 months ago, Arthur officially announced his retirement and appointed me to the board of directors of Sterling Global. If there is one thing I hope anyone listening to my story takes away from this, it is a simple lesson. Never let anyone make you feel small just because you don't fit into their shallow definition of success. The people who treat you like an option when you are down will beg to be part of your story when you rise. Hold on to your integrity. Build your life on a solid foundation of self-respect, hard work, and honesty. Because when the storms of life hit, the flashy facades will always crumble, but a good man standing on a true foundation will always remain standing.